Hello, Brooke. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking all about trauma. So before we dive into all of that, would you mind just sort of telling us a little bit about who you are and what makes you somebody that can talk about trauma today for all of us to learn from?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me. I always love to talk about people and talk about trauma. It's my passion. And what kind of led me here was my own life, my own journey. I was actually born with a cord wrapped around my neck. So I was born being strangled. So that was quite a traumatic entrance into the world. And that actually caused me to have a weakness down my right side, which the doctors told my parents that I would probably never walk. And if I did, I would never run or ride a bike. Well, I obviously didn't get the memo about not walking. I did learn to walk. I was a bit slower than the average child, but I did get there. And then I went back into the hospital to one of my checkups, and they said, well, that's really great that she's managed to walk, but she's never going to ride a bike or run because she won't be able to hold the handlebars and pedal the wheels because her arms and legs are too weak. But because of them saying that, and I was obviously like quite a strong-willed child, I said, I will, and I'll come back in and show you. Because my mother was actually a narcissist as well. So I had the trauma of having a narcissistic mother. And she was constantly saying to me, I just wish you were a normal child. I wish you'd have died at birth. You know, you didn't even have the audacity to be born properly. So I thought if I learned to ride a bike, I'd be normal like my brother and she might love me. So I was determined to ride this bike and go back into the hospital and show the doctors that I could ride a bike. Well, that absolutely sent my mother off in one of her trips because I was the center of attention and she wasn't. And she absolutely, when we got back home and my dad went to work, she absolutely went mad at me and said to me, how dare you show me up in front of the doctors? How dare you defy the doctors? You know, you're nothing but a little show off, little blah, blah, blah. It was used quite awful words. And I can remember just kind of like being curled up in a ball with my hands over my head thinking, I need to stay small to stay safe. And that's how I spent my childhood. I changed like that overnight. It was like I went from this really determined little girl to, you know, defying doctors, learning to walk and ride a bike and run, to being scared to say anything to anybody because it wasn't safe. And so I carried on throughout my childhood like that. And she spent my whole childhood telling me I was ugly, I was worthless, because for her, because she was a narcissist, she wanted this perfect family. And I didn't fit into her perfect image of being a perfect daughter because I had something wrong with me. And she told me all through my life, don't tell anybody about your medical issues because nobody will love you. They will run a mile. Just keep that quiet. It's our secret. Don't tell anybody. And I didn't for years because I honestly believed that people would run if I spoke to them about it. So I grew up believing that I was useless, that I was worthless, that I was no good because I wasn't a normal child. And that's how I kind of spent my childhood. And then when I was 15, I met my first husband. He was 4 years older than me. He happened to be a narcissist as well. And I remember him teaching me to learn to drive. And every time I made a mistake, he would lick his fingers and smack the back of my hand. And my hand would be red raw. He said, but you won't forget to do that again. And I thought, oh, he really loves me. He really cares about me because he really wants me to learn to drive properly. Because of my childhood, that was how I kind of like just thought that was normal. But then we did get married. To cut a long story short about this bit, but then he, 3 months after we got married, he picked me up and threw me against a wardrobe and gave me concussion and whiplash. And that was kind of a moment I thought, something has to change here. Why is, you know, people that I think really should love me and care about me being so awful to me? It must be something I'm doing. So I need to change who I am. So I started to work on my mindset, and I discovered personal development books and worked a lot on my mindset. I then had 2 little boys, and then I got pregnant with my 3rd child, and I bumped into a friend who said to me, oh, I bet you'd love to have a little girl. Quite an innocent little remark, you know, because I'd already got 2 little boys. And it really kind of hit me. My body kind of went into like a trauma response. I was like, oh, no, because if I have a little girl, what if I have the same relationship with my mum and the same relationship that my mum had with her mother? No, I don't want a little girl. So I thought, my goodness, I really need to sort of ramp up this working on my mindset. And at the time, I didn't understand about trauma and how it kind of gets trapped in the body. So I worked really hard on my mindset, thinking I want to give my children a great life that I didn't have as a child. The good news is I did go on to have 2 amazing little girls. They're now 28 and 29, and they're my best friends. So we completely broke that cycle, which is fantastic. But I still spent my whole life having that trauma bond of wanting to please my mother. I was a huge people pleaser. And I spent my life pleasing other people. And my thing in life was like, I want to make everybody happy and I'll do it even if it kills me. And it nearly did, because I was so exhausted all the time because I was running around trying to please everybody else. And then it's funny how I kind of got into coaching. I fell into it by accident because a few of my friends said to me, you really should do this coaching for a living. You're always helping us out. And another friend said, I'm going on it's like coaching week and it's a free weekend, but I don't want to go on my own. Do you fancy coming? I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'd love to learn. Why not? And as they were doing this coaching diploma, I thought, I do that. I already do that. I already do that. So I thought, So I then went on to do my full coaching certification, and then got more into like learning about why I was reacting the way I do, because I knew logically that I was completely safe, but my body would go into like this kind of reaction. Like somebody called me across a room, I'd go, oh my goodness, do they look angry? What are they thinking about? What did I say to them last time? And all these questions would be whirring through my mind. My heart would be pounding, my palms would go sweaty. And they would just come up to me and say, hi, Brooke, how are you doing? And I realized it was a reaction from a childhood, because every time my mother called my name, whether I'd done something wrong or not, I was in trouble. So I thought, okay, so I know I'm not in trouble with this person, because I knew that it was a lovely person coming towards me. So why is my body reacting like this? So I then started studying all about trauma and how it gets trapped in the body, because we can work on our mindset until the cows come home, as the saying goes, and know logically that we're safe. If we don't deal with the trauma and heal those wounds, our body keeps reliving the things that happened to us when we was a child, because it doesn't date stamp it into the past. So I then really got interested in trauma and worked on my trauma and released a lot of my childhood traumas from growing up with a narcissistic mother and having, I ended up having 2 narcissistic relationships. And thankfully now I've got an amazing husband who's really lovely. So yes, thankfully I've healed from that, because I'm not repeating that cycle over and over again. But so many people do, because they don't understand it. So they go from one narcissistic relationship to another, because even though they know it's not right, it feels comfortable to them, because especially if they've had a narcissistic parent, it will be familiar to their body, so they will kind of like keep going back to it.
So before we talk more about trauma, can we just sort of start at the beginning and define trauma, or at least your understanding of trauma? When we're using the word trauma, what do we mean by that? So what do you mean by trauma? What's your understanding of it, or how do you want people to kind of understand that term?
Well, trauma, basically, it's an event that happens, and the trauma is how we perceive it and how we carry on thinking about it. Like with the instance with me, with when my mum kind of let loose on me when I was 5. The event was she was angry with me, and she just vented out on me. But my perception of it wasn't safe to speak out and do something, because for me, because I spoke out to the doctors, she then was angry with me. So my trauma response was, I need to keep small and to keep safe. And that's how my thought process went. So it's not the actual event, it's what we think about the event that creates the trauma. So 2 people can have a car accident and not actually be physically injured, but one could walk away absolutely fine and the other one could walk away with PTSD. But it depends on how they see the accident and feel about the actual event, and how it causes a trauma in them. And also as well, how much trauma they've had in their previous life as well, because the analogy I often use is like, if your life's like a swimming pool, if you imagine it's a swimming pool, and every trauma we have is like a beach ball. We can have big beach balls and small beach balls. So if 2 people in a car, one's only got 1 or 2 beach balls in their pool, but the other one's got loads of beach balls, they will be affected differently from the same event because of how they perceive it and how they feel about it. And that's what trauma is. It's how they perceive an event that's happened.
So given that we've got, I mean, when you think about where traumas can come from, you've mentioned a lot about childhood trauma, but do you think there's trauma that we can be carrying from our previous lives, from ancestors, that are showing up in our lives today?
Absolutely. I talk a lot about the mother wound, which is a wound that your mother has because she hasn't healed from her wounds. And trauma can go back, 7 generations. So it's like looking back, because if you think about it, like especially like if we had grandparents that grew up in the war when things were rationed, they will be traumatized about not wasting anything, being a scarcity kind of like mindset and thought process, because they don't know where their next bit of food's coming from. So that can be passed down to their children, who then pass it down to their children. So it can be passed down from generation to generation, but people don't actually get curious and find out why it's happening that way. Because I often have clients come to me and say, well, that's just my way my family's always been, or that's just the way my, you know, my mother's always been, she's always been a bit distant. But actually it's like getting curious as to why they've been like that. And if it doesn't sit right with you now and it doesn't help you move forward, you can change it. And that's what I'm sort of raising awareness for. You don't have to live the life that your parents instilled in you. You can actually change it and have a completely different life. You know, we grow up, you know, especially if we're people pleasers and we have had a traumatic childhood, and our parents say, right, we should have an academic career, we should be a doctor or should be a lawyer, you know, but you actually want to be, you know, an artist, or you want to join the circus or whatever you want to be. You don't do what you really want to do. You do what you feel you should do because you've got that trauma wound of not feeling good enough. So you want to people please your parents so you can have that wound of being good enough kind of like fed, rather than it hurting and bleeding.
And I want to talk about people pleasing, because people pleasing is such a huge thing for so many people. And do you think that the people pleaser habit or behavior pattern, do you think it mainly does come from a trauma response?
Yes, because it's that we learn that, like when I was a child, I learned that if I can make my mum a little slight bit happy, she was less likely to either physically or verbally abuse me, because she was happy. So it was like, okay, so you learn, okay, if I make her happy, then my life is going to be less dangerous. I'm going to be safer. So we learn to like realize that as a young child, in a young child's mind, it's like, okay, it's safer this way to do this way. So we put our feelings on the back burner, or like, you know, completely bury them. You know, my feelings, I just never ever worried about my feelings. You know, I would self-sabotage because I wasn't important, I wasn't worthy, I wasn't good enough. Like the 4 major like wounds that people have are like not good enough, not worthy, not important, or not feeling lovable. And we have these wounds, and what we have is like protector parts that come up, and people pleasing is like a protector part, because the protector part comes in to protect like the little 4 or 5-year-old little child where the traumas first happened, because it doesn't see us as the adult we are. So if we can actually like people please and make somebody else happy, it's better than us being rejected and having that worthiness wound, or that I'm not lovable, and somebody rejecting us by us not saying yes to being a people pleaser. Because if we said no, what if they don't like us anymore? Oh my goodness. And that would really, really hurt our inner child wounds that haven't been healed. But once we actually heal them, I mean, I can quite happily, if somebody says to me, can you do something for me? I can just quite happily say no, without having to like, whereas I used to say, oh my goodness, I'm really sorry, I can't do this, but and go into a huge essay of why, you know, and then feel terrible for weeks afterwards because I've said no to this person. Whereas now I'll just say, no, you know, I can't do it.
So being able to say no, do you think that they're like, you know, part of me wants to believe that there's this, you know, we can just focus our trauma clearing efforts on this one thing, and then we clear that, and then that's it. We can say no happily, or you can stop being a people pleaser. But the reality is that I've discovered my own trauma clearances, it's just a big mess of loads of stuff, and you just got to kind of go in it, like you know, almost like going into a jumble sale and just like sorry, jumble sale is a term that is where you sell loads of your old crap. So there's just loads of old stuff everywhere. I don't know if jumble sale is a global term that everyone's going to understand, but yeah, you can't just go in and go pick one item and then walk out with it. You just got to clear the whole lot out, and then great. So you're agreeing with me there. She's nodding for those that are listening. Yes. Is that your experience of it as well? That you kind of got to untangle it, separate the strands, and really almost like a knotted hair. You kind of just got to work through it slowly, and eventually the knot will come out. I've got memories like my youngest daughter just wakes up with her head looking like a nest every day, and she kind of really struggles with it. She takes a little bit, brushes the ends out, then moves up a bit, brushes that bit out, and then gradually you get there. That's how I see sort of untangling trauma. Is that how you see it as well?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why a lot of people are scared of doing it. They'd rather bury their feelings and just live their life, even if they're in pain, being that people pleaser, because that's less painful than they feel of dealing with the actual pain. But what I do, and I'm sure you do with your clients, is I go to the speed of their nervous system, because our nervous system will tell us what we can handle and what we can't, because it is a bit like opening a can of worms. You just don't know what's going to come out. Like with me, my dad died in September, and I had my dad, my auntie, and my granddad, who were like my safety people when I was a little child, because my mother was horrendous. and like he was the last of the three to pass away. And the only way I can describe it is like, you know, when you drive a car when the petrol runs low and the mechanic says, don't do that because all the gunk's going to be dragged up from the bottom of the...
Yeah.
I felt like all my gunk had been dragged up and was going around and I was in a right state. And it just hit me. And it's like, I went back into that hyper vigilant little girl because I knew I'd going to have to, like, you know, deal with this. But it was like, my dad's now passed away and he's safe. And this sounds really, really strange to anybody listening, but because my mother took a lot out of my dad because she was his carer for the last few years. Now he's passed away. So I know he's at peace and he's safe. And it was like my body was saying, it's your time to heal now, Brooke. Finally heal those real buried wounds that I've been buried. I didn't realize I had. And I was just a mess of just crying and crying and crying. And my husband said, right, you know, we need to get some more therapy for him. Absolutely, you know, and I had some therapy and it was, you know, the best thing I ever done, you know. My dad passing away wasn't a great thing for me, but for my body and for my trauma, it was like it jolted me. It was like that jolt I needed to release it. So we're always a work in progress because we don't know what's going to come up, you know. Thankfully, I cleared a huge amount of stuff, you know, but we can have traumas anytime in our life, you know, a car accident or something happening to somebody close to us that we know as an adult. It doesn't always have to be childhood trauma, but people don't realize that, you know, trauma can happen at any time in our lives, and we're all sort of got some sort of trauma from us, you know, even if we've got really kind, loving parents that we grew up with. I remember I had a client once that had an issue with money, and when we delved into it, it was because her parents wanted to teach her the value of money. So when she was little, they used to pay her in pennies for doing jobs. Well, she perceived that as, I'm only worth pennies, which she then grew up with a trauma around money and worthiness of money, you know. So even well-meaning parents, you know, if you haven't got narcissistic parent like I had, you can still have trauma because it depends on how you feel about it at the time and how you perceived it. And it came to be that at the same time as that was happening, she was actually having some issues at school. And so the two of them, because you emotionally sort of like, you know, quite vulnerable, it culminated in her feeling like she was not worthy to have money. So it can come from any area at all, really.
So let's talk about money, because I know a lot of people, when I've been running some trauma clearances at the moment, some free ones, just to help people to clear their stuff, because I think that we're going through a period of challenging times for mental health, and so anything I can do to help. And I keep getting requests at the end, like, can you clear my money traumas? Can you clear my money traumas? And so I'm like, well, yeah, sure, you know, that's obviously something that we can do. But what's your understanding of the link between trauma and money? And you know, people kind of always want to earn more and have more abundance, and they feel they've got all these money blocks. What in the work that you've done, what are the links that you've seen between trauma and money?
It's often the stories that we grow up with and the beliefs with our parents and our grandparents and how they see money. So if they're all sort of like penny pinching and saving, you grow up thinking, okay, well, I need to hold on to this money. I can't possibly spend it and invest in myself because, you know, I need it in the bank. I need to hold on to it. You know, and other people tend to want to spend it to make themselves feel good because of that instant hit of dopamine, that instant gratification of, oh, I feel good because I brought a new handbag, a new top, a new car, or whatever it is. But it's understanding that money isn't actually a gauge of our worthiness, you know, whereas like it's how we feel about ourselves, because money is just energy at the end of the day. It's just a tool that we use, you know, in life. So it's thinking about how you actually feel about yourself more than what it is. Because if you feel great about yourself and you feel great about what you can do, then the money will actually start flowing in. But if you kind of like blocking it, thinking, well, I'm not actually worthy to have that money, you will self-sabotage to stop that money coming in some way, shape or form, even if you really want that money, or even if you earn the money. So for example, I was using the example, if you suddenly come into possession of £1,000 and you feel bad about money and you haven't got, you know, your own self-worth, something will go wrong in your house that will cost £1,000 to fix, so that money goes straight back out again. So it's about how you feel about it and whether you feel, you know, worthy that you deserve this money, because we're often growing up, you need to work hard for your money, you know, you need to save your money, you know. And a lot of parents will say, and my parents used to say, well, I'm not the Bank of England, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. And it's those stories that we hear Because up until we're 7, we haven't got the critical faculty to reason, thinking, actually, is that true or not? We believe whatever our parents or people in authority say to us, and we take that on as our truth. But actually, is that our truth? And it's getting curious. And I'm always telling my clients, get curious about things where you're stuck. Get curious and write on a piece of paper, what is blocking me from earning money, for example. And then just see what pops up into your head and write it down. And then if it pops up into your head, well, I should save money. Okay, so where's that belief come from that you should save money? I mean, I had a big money issue because my dad is a big saver and my mum is a big spender. And I can remember when I was about 5 or 6, they were arguing because my mum spent some money and they'd gone overdrawn 50p. And because I was a traumatized child anyway, I couldn't stand noise. And I can remember getting 50p out of my piggy bank, dragging a chair over and kind of getting in the middle of them saying, here, have 50p, just stop shouting. So I grew up with like one parent saying it's good to spend money, one parent saying, no, you need to save it. And obviously I didn't want to be like my mum and spend money, because I thought if I spend money like my mum did, then I could end up being like my mum. And I didn't want to end up being like my mum because of the trauma I've gone through of her being a narcissist. So I had a lot of work to do on my money mindset. As you can imagine, the conflict that went on a daily basis in my family, because my dad is like a farmer and he's like an old time farmer and his family's got a lot of money. So if his belt broke, he would just tie a piece of string around his trousers and couldn't care less. Money wasn't like an important thing to him. Whereas my mum didn't have any money where she came from, but she married into money. So money was like, her be all and end all. She thought that money would make her happy, but then she discovered it didn't. And that made her even more angry about life and about me as well. So she felt good when she spent it because it was helping her wound of feeling worthy and good enough. She's always draped in like diamond. I can remember growing up her saying, if you don't do as you're told, I'll cut you at the will and you won't get my diamond earrings, you won't get my diamond necklaces. I'm like, oh, I don't want them anyway. So because they weren't important to, I'm not a person that's into, not saying there's anything wrong with having diamond necklaces and earrings, but because I was threatened with it all through my life, it just isn't something that I'm interested in whatsoever. So so it is looking back into where it's come from. Even if you had loving, kind parents who were, think about what they said to you as a child. What did your grandparents say to you as a child? What was your teachers teaching you about money as a child? And it's looking into that and getting really curious. I'm always telling people, get curious about things, though, because we often have feelings come up and think, I don't want to feel that, so we push them down. And it's very much like if a little 5-year-old child comes up to you and says, mummy, 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 or auntie, 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 or aunt, and you go, yeah, shh, in a minute. They just get louder and louder and louder until you go, what? Type thing. But if you actually, when they first go, mummy, 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 what is it, what's the problem, and sort it out and deal with it. And it's the same with us. When we have feelings coming up of not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, instead of like pushing them down, because the more we push them down, the more they'll come up some other way, even harder, and come back again. If we actually like lean into them and get curious, well, where's this coming from? What's happening? And I can remember like when the last time pre-COVID I spoke on stage, I was standing at the back of the hall getting all mic'd up, and my little inner critic, who I always call Gertrude, popped up and said, what do you think you're doing? And I thought, okay, so because I've had all this worked on myself and all this, I know not to sort of think, oh my goodness, what am I doing, and panic. Now, if that had been 10 years ago, I'd have probably gone, I don't know, and ran into the toilets and hid. But what I actually did was like, this thought's popped up. And I answered that thought. What I'm actually doing is I'm going to go on stage, I'm going to share my story, and I'm going to impact and inspire as many people in this room that I can. And with that, my little voice went quiet and my body was absolutely fine. And I went on stage and had a ball of a time. So it's really getting curious. Those thoughts pop up because they're protecting you, like saying, well, hang on a minute, the last time you spoke out, this happened, because they're in that trauma response from when you was a child. Like when I was 5, I spoke out, I got hit and I got abused verbally. So it's like, hang on, I'm just checking in with you, just to let you know that if we speak out, it's not really that safe, but it's like then reassuring that voice that, okay, I am safe now because I've done the work and I can do it and I can move forward. So I really, if you can't take anything else from this podcast, take away the fact that when thoughts come up and feelings come up in your body and your mind, get curious as to why they've come up and where they've come from.
When you mentioned some of the money stuff that you were talking about, a lot of those sound like limiting beliefs. And I know when people I've spoken to around the money, they kind of, they run towards the limiting beliefs and really try and work really hard with the beliefs. But from what you're saying that a lot of these stories, these beliefs come out of the trauma response. And actually, if you really want to get to the root of sorting out whether it's your people pleaser stuff or your money stuff or whatever issues you've got going on, that limiting beliefs, are they like a red herring and actually trauma's where it's at? Or okay, yes, or do they sort of warrant looking at?
Yes.
Okay,
yes, because if you've grown up in a family that's got no issues with money and they're like encouraging you to invest and to spend and take those risks, you don't have money issues. You don't have conversations with those people about money because of, and I can remember watching a program once about somebody who was a self-made millionaire, and he actually says, I won't do the lottery because I will win it because money comes to me easily. And that was his mindset, and that's how he felt about it. He doesn't, because people get so hung up about money. It's like, oh my goodness, you know, a lot of people, children are told, oh, well, rich men are greedy, rich women are greedy, you know, or they must have like conned somebody out of money, you know, they're criminals, they, you know, and it's a bad thing to have money. But, you know, there's so many people that have got lots of money who do really good things as well. But we're not taught about that as children, because if our parents have got money issues themselves, they're going to have that issue of like, oh, well, you know, it's kind of all right for them, but, you know, it's not us. So we couldn't possibly earn that money. So we need to kind of reason with our children why we're not wealthy like them. And again, it's back to that feeling worthy and feeling good enough. So it's them making up reasons as to why they haven't got the money that possibly the rich people have. So again, it goes back to not feeling good enough and not feeling worthy and having those wounds. So using something to cover up rather than to face them and deal with them, using, you know, another protective part. So getting angry about people who are rich is a protective part to sort of stop you from actually like going forward and going for the money yourself.
Now, you talked a lot about getting curious, and I know that there are a lot of people that I speak to that message me and they're just too worried about going near the box of worm, the can of worms that is whatever it is might be their traumas. And there are some people I'm speaking to that they say, I've got loads of traumas. If I go there, I'll probably be out of action for 2 months and I'll just be a mess on the floor. I can't go there because I've got a life to lead, I've got a business to run, I've got a family to look after. And so they know they've got to sort it, but they don't go there because they're so worried about what happens when they open that can. So have you got anything that you'd like to say to people like that are just so worried about sort of making a start and chipping away at the traumas that they really want, they're carrying with them today?
Yeah, first of all, I can completely relate. For years, I was like, no, whatever I blanked out is blanked out for a reason. I'm surviving as I am, so I'm fine. But, you know, the difference is when you actually deal with those traumas, you go from surviving to thriving. You know, like when now I'm thriving, I'm running a healthy business, I've got a wonderful marriage, got 4 great children and 8 amazing grandchildren. But for years, I was like that the same. But the thing is, the best thing you can do is find somebody, a coach that is or a therapist that is trauma informed to start with. That's the main thing, because they will go at the speed of your nervous system. And they will understand to take it really easily. And you can still work and you can still function whilst dealing with that as well. But you just take it at your own pace with your own nervous system. Because if you've got a coach that says, right, you need to do this week, and it triggers off your nervous system, you're just going to go even further into a shell. Whereas like understanding that, you know, working through getting your nervous system calm to start with, to be on the call, and building that trust with that coach or that therapist, and then saying like, you know, I just want to go through this really, really slowly, and I've got lots and lots of trauma, and I completely understand that because I had huge amounts of traumas, you know, from, as I said, like from being born a narcissistic parent, narcissistic relationships, people pleaser, self-sabotaging. I had, you know, the lot of them. So and my thing is, you know, I understand it, and what my clients love most about me is that I'll say to them, I will take you by the hand and walk you baby step by baby step until you want to start running a little bit, and then we can run together, and then we can really fly. But we'll always go at the speed of your own nervous system. And trauma-informed coaches and therapists will understand that about their client. They won't push them to do, you know, and say, well, you just need to push through it. You just need to push through that fear. No, because all that will do is trigger off their nervous system, and they will go into a fight or flight or freeze response, and you'll get nothing out of them, and they will feel terrible because, you know, because the people pleaser part of them as well will want to please the coach or the therapist, and they won't be doing it right. So it will send them backwards rather than helping them move forwards. But I do encourage anybody that's got any trauma to go and research and find a trauma coach and therapist, and then have a talk with them, and just, you know, take it at your own pace. It's your body, your life, and you can take it at your own pace. You don't have to deal with, you know, 30, 40, 50 years of trauma in 2 weeks, you know, because your body is not going to be able to handle that. It's just that take it at your own pace. And once you've cleared a lot of the major ones, the rest will kind of just come out and flow nicely, and you'll learn tips and techniques to actually deal with it. Because what I teach my clients is to have things that empower them to help themselves, you know, in between our session, because my main thing is want to get clients to be empowered to be able to deal with their own trauma, you know, as things happen and as things come up, rather than have to keep coming back to having therapy and having coaching sessions. Because it's all about, for me, it's all about empowering people to help themselves to be the person that they want to be.
Yeah. Now let's just talk a moment about the experience of clearing a really big, horrible trauma. And I'd just be really interested in what your own personal experience is, like the actual kind of going through that process. And you know, like when I've gone through clearing some of my horrible ones, it's just been a very tearful, snotty experience for about, and I finish up with a mountain of tissues, and I feel completely spent, and I just want to go to sleep and, you know, just rest and recover from what I feel has just been this massive internal workout. And then I wake, but I feel lighter for it, and grateful that I've let go of it, even though I cried and it felt like I was a wailing banshee for some of it. And I don't know where some of that pain came from, that emotional pain, as it kind of surfaced. I mean, that's kind of basically my experience of clearing really horrible stuff. But I'm curious about what your experience is like. If there's one that's really a horrible one, like just so that people can hear what that experience is like. So they can kind of go, oh, okay, well, I can cope with crying for 45 minutes or whatever it is, you know, like what's been your experience?
Mine's very, very similar. It's like, it is because it's a heavy weight, and trauma can cause pain in our bodies because it gets trapped in the body. But once we release it, we do feel a lot lighter. Now, I couldn't, as a child, I couldn't cry because my dad was a farmer, so he would pop back into the house at any time. So if my mum was having a go at me and like being physically or mentally abusive to me, and she saw my dad come, she'd go, right, stop crying, because you'll get even worse when your dad goes back to work. So I learned to like not cry, like, you know, like that. So I eventually learned not to cry at all. So when I started having therapy, it's like, oh my God, these tears are coming down my face, and it's like, what are these type things? But then once I started, it was like, you know, it was just like a tsunami of like, it all came out. And it was for like the session, and I felt exhausted after. Now I love the nature, so I love to go for a walk in nature to sort of like re-energize. But it's whatever you love to do most, whether you want to go for a sleep. I always tell my clients, like, you may feel like you just want to sleep, you may feel really energized and light because you've got rid of that heavy burden and you want to go out for a walk, or you just might want to sit quietly and read a book, whatever. But you know, it's only for that little time. And crying is a great thing to do. We're brought up as well, don't cry, babies cry, you know, don't cry, man up. And like, crying is a wrong thing to do, but crying is a really natural thing to do, it because it cleanses our body and it helps us to release trauma. So I always just tell people, you know, you can spend your life just surviving and pushing all those feelings and thoughts down and feeling dead and empty inside, or you can go through a few times of like you say 45 minutes, 30 minutes, sobbing your heart out, being all snotty and like puffy eyed and feeling great afterwards, and then actually thriving in your life. So it's not as horrendous as what you think it is, because we think, okay, all those things that we've blanked out, I don't know what they are, so I don't even want to think about them. But because even though we've blanked them out, they're still in our body and our body's remembering them, and they're still weighing us down really, really heavy. And I was liking it to, you wouldn't carry around a suitcase full of old junk that you didn't want, that you when you moved house, you wouldn't just carry it around with you all day, because it would make your arm and your shoulders ache. But that's what we're doing with emotions. And I like the analogy that I once heard about making a cake. If you think about making a cake, you have your eggs, your flour, your water, your oil, whatever it is you're using, but then you have to make it all messy. for something beautiful to come out at the end of it. So I would say to my clients, so imagine that you're sat there with your self-sabotage, your people pleasing, your trauma, your perfectionism, whatever it is, other traumas that you've got, they're all sort of sat there separately. Get them all together, get them all messy, and then, get rid of them, release them. And what comes out is that beautiful person that you've always been, because I'm a big believer that we're all beautiful diamonds that we just buried under like layer upon layer of rubbish and trauma. And what I help people do is to uncover that beautiful diamond so you can shine as bright as you like to. Okay, not everybody may want to be like me and stand on stage and tell my story, but you may want to shine bright enough to be able to stand in your own 2 feet and say, actually, no, I don't agree with that, and have boundaries. Because a lot of people struggle with boundaries because of the people pleasing part coming up. So it's realizing that, okay, think about yourself as a cake. You've got these parts, and then you just need to mix them all together, get a bit messy, have a bit of snot in there, and several tears, and then at the end of it, you just come out this amazing, beautiful person, because you've cleansed away all the trauma. And it's quite toxic for our bodies to have this trauma sat in our bodies. I mean, for years I had a pain in my lower back, and when I worked on some of my trauma, that disappeared. And then I used to struggle with really stiff shoulders, and a lot of my clients do as well, which used to cause a neck ache and cause headaches. But releasing all that trauma, you release all that stuck in your the fascias of your muscles, so it can actually release actual physical pain as well, which people don't realize. I once had a lady came to me, and I said, "Are you okay?" She was like a client. She went, "No, I was in A&E last night." I said, "My goodness, that's what happened." She said, "I had this horrendous pain in my chest." And she said, "I could hardly breathe." She said, "But when I went there, they'd done all the tests and there's nothing wrong with me." I said, "Well, you still look pale." I said, "Are you feeling okay now?" She went, "No, I've still got this horrendous pain." So we worked through the session and realized what it was. We released the trauma that she was stuck with, and the pain went. And she said, "I cannot believe how different." I mean, she said, the doctors at the A&E couldn't do anything. She said, "But sitting here talking to you and dealing with it and understanding where it's come from and releasing it, that pain is gone." And the next day she was outside gardening and having a great time. But before that, she could hardly breathe. She was like an old lady go, because she was struggling to breathe because she had such a heavy weight on her chest. But it was to do with the trauma that she'd had.
Yeah. A lot of my clients know, they come to me saying, "It's really weird, but I don't need to sleep as much anymore." And, you say it's really exhausting carrying all this stuff, like the heavy suitcase, carrying all this emotional stuff is also massively exhausting, takes up lots of your energy, which you kind of need to recoup at night. And I've noticed that since I've done a lot of all that inner work, I probably need 2 to 3 hours less sleep every night, which, when you think about people going, "Well, I haven't got time to do X, I haven't got time to do X." Imagine if you could find an extra 2 to 3 hours a day from not needing to sleep as much. I mean, that's the benefit as well of sort of looking and facing your stuff, like your traumas, and letting go of them, because not only are you going to let go of your pains, your aches and all of that, also not, how you'll have some firmer boundaries and all that, but you could also have a lot more time to do the things that you really love and to bring about the changes in your life as well. Is that something that you've noticed?
Yes, as well. And as well, if you think about how trauma works, when we're not traumatized, we feel connected, we feel safe. And then if something happens and triggers us up, we go into that fight or flight, like ready, the adrenaline starts pumping through our body. But then we can get to a stage of where, okay, I can't deal with this, so I'm going to go into what's called freeze. And people tend to actually bury their head under the duvet, and sleep is one way of freezing, to not deal with, having to deal with how they feel. So to sleep is actually being in like a freeze response as well. So once you release that trauma, you're then not spending as much time in that freeze response. You're spending more time in being that what's called ventral vagal, as being connected and being, feeling safe. So a lot of people that are traumatized will tend to sleep a lot as well. A, because like you said, it takes a lot of energy, and B, because it's their body's way of dealing with it. Because if I'm underneath the duvet sleeping, I'm safe. Nobody's going to hurt me, so it's realizing that it's one of those two things. It's lighter when you've released those trauma, it doesn't take as much energy, but also when you're traumatized, you can spend a lot of time in that freeze kind of bit of your life where it's just safe to just like sit and do nothing. Because I'm not doing nothing, I can't get hurt anymore than I already am.
One thing that I've been really interested in is when I've been looking, because I'm kind of hunting down I hunt down my head trash. Like I just kind of look under every nook and cranny, because I'm just kind of like, I've had so much positive change in my life as a result of clearing my stuff, that I just want to get rid of all of it. And I know I'm not going to get rid of all of it, because there's always new stuff that's emerging, and hidden stuff, like the hidden traumas that kind of surface when there's stuff happening around you. So it kind of feels a bit like a never-ending journey, but that doesn't mean that I kind of don't want to sort of hunt it down. But I've been really interested in my own journey, where I've seen that I've been traumatized in the past by so procrastination for me, like you've hinted a little bit with what you just mentioned, but there's been trauma around waiting, so waiting for something. But then I've also got trauma around the taking action bit. So when there's, you hear people are like feeling stuck, and if you think, well, you've been traumatized from waiting, so waiting is a real problem for you, because that's carried trauma, because if you've left it too long, then stuff's gone wrong. But then also taking action has caused trauma for you, and you think, well, goodness me, where do I'm standing in this narrow gap between waiting and taking action, because both carry a trauma response to me. What do I do? And people do. And when I've looked at this myself, I thought, wow, this is totally like not messed up, but like this is blowing my head, because you kind of assume that the trauma is behind something negative, but actually there's positive, well, things that we might deem as a positive action or behavior or thing, but might also carry trauma behind it. Does that sort of, if you sort of come across anything like that in the work that you've done with people?
Yeah, and I also get clients that come in and they say, I want to go forward, and then I feel stuck, and they'll actually do that and lean forward, and it's like a brick wall's actually stopping me, even though there's no like brick wall there. And again, it's going back to like, okay, what does your body think will happen if you step forward into that? And again, it always comes back to like something that will happen in their childhood. It's even teachers. I can remember when I was at school, teachers would say, sit down, stop showing off, you're getting too big for your boots, if somebody was excited about something happening. And I can remember one little boy in my classroom when I was little. He was really, really quite a lively little boy, and he was quite happy to come in. But as the teachers kept telling him off for showing off, he slowly kind of went into his own shell, and he ended up being quite a little shy boy. And now looking back, I realized that teacher, without realizing it, traumatized that little child by saying it's not safe to show up and say, I've done this, I've achieved this. If you think about it, children naturally do come in and say, look what I've done, like with my grandchildren. I can remember like when they were potty training, like, or walked in, look, Grandma, I've weed in the potty, like, okay, great, lovely, let Grandma take the potty, because it's a natural thing to do, to be proud of what you achieve. But especially when we've got parents who've got their own wounds, if we're going to be like saying, oh, I've done this, I've done that, like, oh, it sounds like you're showing off, and it doesn't look like I've taught you how to behave well as a parent, so I can't be a good enough parent, so I just got to quieten you down. Like, don't be saying that to people. People don't want to hear all the things that you've done, but actually people do want to hear it. And I'm always encouraging my clients to celebrate anything that they've done, even if they think it's a small little thing. Celebrate it, because your body doesn't know whether it's a big thing or a little thing. It's just having that feel good factor of like, yes, I've achieved that. So you're more likely to then want to move forward to the next step to achieve something else. Because it's a natural reaction when we're going to do something new that we feel a bit nervous. But it's checking in with our bodies, that is that just a normal nervous reaction, or is that is my nervous system kicked off because of a trauma from when I was younger, and that's preventing me from doing it? And it's knowing the difference, and whether to sort of say, okay, well, just go ahead and take that one baby step to start forming that new habit. Or actually, like with me with Facebook Lives, I had a real fear of doing Facebook Lives. But what I did is I set myself a challenge to do a Facebook Live every day for a month. And I chose February because it was the shortest month. But by the 8th or 9th day, it's like, oh, well, these are okay. I haven't died. I'm fine. The first few were terrible. I was like, oh my goodness, look at my hair. And it's like, but, now I do a Facebook Live without thinking about what my hair looks like or whatever. But it's understanding whether, when you're doing something, is it just because it's a new thing and your body's like, oh, I've not done this before? Or is it actually, no, we're not doing this because the last time we did that, something terrible happened to us.
Yeah. Now, you talked a lot about childhood trauma. I think we can all agree that childhood is where a lot of our traumas are coming from. But this kind of then makes me think that parents listening are probably thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? But I think as a parent, you've just got to make peace with the fact that whatever you do, your kids are going to need therapy. So kind of just get over that, get that out of the way.
I always say to my clients, you know, one thing you can guarantee about parenting is you're going to mess it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there are going to be certain things, because the thing is that even just what you just said about kids sort of coming and telling you what they've just done, like I love encouraging my kids, but they just do it because I don't know whether I'm encouraging them too much, if that's the thing, but then I just get so many of the like, oh, I've done this, I'm like, oh my God, I'm okay, or enough already. Like, I'm trying to get something done, like, you know, so I work from home, so they're constantly walking and showing me the latest thing. And yeah, I'm guilty of like going, all right, you don't need to show me everything that you've done. And so now I'm like, okay, is that going to traumatize them? Like, you know, where does a parent draw the line? I mean, is there anything that somebody can do to minimize that trauma response?
I think listening to your children and hearing what they're saying, actually really listening to what they've got to say. And you know, sometimes you're going to be like, no, I'm just busy, just wait. You know, it's not going to send them into a trauma. But when you start talking to children, explaining things and letting them know what's going on and telling them that you don't feel great, if you don't feel great, be a great role model to them. Because so many parents are, oh, I just want to burst into tears, but I will wait until the children go to bed because I don't want them to see them crying, because I don't want them to feel upset because I'm crying. But actually, if you let your children know that you get upset and you cry, it's a natural thing to do and it's good to do, then they're gonna, when they're feeling like a bit down, they're gonna let that emotion out as well, rather than keeping it trapped in and burying it in their bodies. Now, I do a great thing to help my clients to think about, and I know if you're watching on a podcast, it's a bit difficult, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it, is what's called the hand brain palm. So like if you fold your hand up like into a fish shape, but tuck your thumb underneath, and it's like the front bit of your knuckles are like your prefrontal cortex, and your wrist up into your thumb is like your brain stem, and your thumb is like your limbic system, and that's like your fight or flight. So if you can imagine, like with me and you at the moment, if we've both got our fists closed, we're both having a nice conversation, we both feel completely safe and secure. Now, if one of us says something and it happened to trigger the other one off, we actually like flip our lid, which basically our fingers sort of straighten, which will reveal our thumb, which is like our fight or flight. So we're then feeling insecure because we're not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy. And we may react and say something back, which then causes you to flip your lid. We're both reacting from our amygdala, you know, our limbic system, where it's like the fight or flight. There's going to be no resolution. So like with your children, if a child comes home from school and says, I've had a terrible day, this has happened, this has happened, and you go, well, you need to get your homework done, and they go, why you're not listening to me, and they flip their lid. I just told you, you know, you just don't ever listen to me. So realize that they've actually just flipped their lid because of something that's happened at school, not because of you. So let them just calm down again. And when they've calmed down and they're then thinking from their front of their prefrontal cortex, when their fist basically is closed again, you can then have a conversation with them saying, oh yeah, I'm sorry you've had a bad day. Do you want to tell me about your bad day? It's okay, you know, that you haven't feel great. You know, if you want to cry about it, just cry, because it's a great way to release your emotions, is to cry and let those tears out, and let children know it's okay not to feel okay. You know, because the biggest thing is, as mums, we're so very protective. We don't want our children to think that we're upset and they're going to bed thinking that their mum's upset, which, you know, is a natural thing. But actually, if we let them know that we don't always feel great, and sometimes we shout when we don't mean to, or sometimes we're in a rush, you know, when they've got, because whatever's happening in their world is really, really important. That's their whole world. Where to us, it's like, oh, well, you just need to put the blue shoes on, not the black ones. But, you know, if everybody else at school's wearing the black ones, it's so important that they wear the right color shoes or whatever. So it's understanding, you know, thinking about where they're coming from and how they feel as well. And thinking back to how you felt, you know, when you was a child, or when you was listened and heard to. And if you get it wrong, tell your children, look, I'm really sorry, I was really wrong. I shouldn't have said it the way I said it, or, you know, I should have stopped and listened to you, but mummy's got 100,000 things on her mind at the moment and I'm not feeling great, or whatever it is. Because children will understand that if you give them the chance to like know about it. But if you just think, okay, I'll just keep everything away from them and just let them know that I'm absolutely fine, and have this false kind of I'm fine look on your face, they're going to grow up thinking that's the way it's supposed to be, which then creates another generation of traumatized people. But if you're actually open with them, and it's difficult to do, it's difficult to say to your children, actually, I'm not feeling great, you know, because it's not what we've kind of like grown up being taught to do. Because if you look back, our mothers did it and our grandmothers did it, so it's generations to generations of, like, you know, such as British stiff upper lips. You know, you can't be crying in public or being seen to be upset. Good grief, you know, what will people think? You know, that's always that thing of what will people think about us. Well, people are going to think what they're going to think, so we can't control that.
Excuse me. So it sounds to me like the way that you look at things is that basically it's all about trauma. If you've got anything that's not going right in your life, it's probably down to trauma. Is that a fair response?
Yeah. When you dig down, it could be like it's suddenly like, if you've got a partner that always puts something on account where you like to keep it clear, and you tolerate and tolerate, then all of a sudden you're like, for goodness sake, it's like, what is it that's triggered it off? Was it the thing being put on the table? Was it the fact that you didn't feel that you were heard? You didn't think that you was important enough because you'd said to them, please don't put that on there, I like to keep that surface clear, or whatever it is. Or can you please put, you know, if you've got a partner that puts the dirty washing just outside the dirty bin rather than put it in the dirty bin, whatever it is, you know, that something that causes you to kind of like get really angry or get upset, there's normally something really underlying underneath that, like you don't feel like you're being heard, or you don't feel like you've been listened to, you don't feel like you're important enough for them to take notice of what you've been saying. So yeah, it's always looking back into it, like I said about money. If you meet people that have got absolutely no issues with money, and look at their parents probably had no issues with money because it wasn't a big issue type thing. You know, like you get parents like, oh, my children are such fussy eaters. It's like, why are they fussy eaters? You know, because my children weren't fussy eaters, but I didn't make a big thing of it. And their children aren't fussy eaters now because it wasn't a big thing of it. So it's like looking back to seeing what things were made, you know, a big issue of, and what things were like, okay, that's just fine, that's just normal, it's just run of the mill days sort of thing. So yeah, it will always send back to something that's happened, whether you've been, like I said, it's the four main ones: not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, not feeling lovable, or not feeling important. Because if you say something and somebody ignores it enough times, it's going to knock your I'm not important in your eyes. You know, I don't feel important. You know, if you want to go and do something, you keep self-sabotaging. It's like, I don't feel good enough to do that. I don't believe that I'm good enough. So it always does come back to like, and we've all got trauma, you know, even us coaches and therapists, you know. If I meet a coach and therapist and says, you know, I'm absolutely fine, I'm 100% sorted, I'm like, oh, let's have a conversation. I love to have a conversation because, you know, and then when I get down to that, actually, yeah, I just feel that as a coach or therapist, I should have this persona that I'm all sorted and I'm all together. But life is always life, and things happen. Like, you know, when my dad passed away, although he was poorly, I didn't know how I was going to react to it, because you just don't know until things happen. But it's having those tools and techniques to know and understand what's happening so you can deal with it. So yeah, I was out of action for a bit, but I come back again from it. But you know, a lot of people don't. I know a lot of people that have parents have died, like, you know, years and years ago, or somebody's died, and they still haven't moved on from that. They're still in that kind of situation. They're in that trauma bond with it because they haven't dealt with the trauma of it, you know, because of what would have happened previous to that as well. So it's understanding that what's going on with our body and what's going on with our minds, and knowing how to deal with it. You know, like, we're all human beings at the end of the day. We all have things that will knock us sideways that we're not expecting, and that's what happens in life. So
but also the good things, like I recently decided to pursue my dream life by leaving the UK and coming to live in the south of France. And that sounds like a really positive, fun, yay thing to do. And oh my God, it's been the hardest thing ever. And I've hit so many of my fears, so many of my traumas. There's so much shit that's come up for me in pursuing my dream. And I've been through the mill. But yeah, we're here now, but my God, the journey has not been an easy one. And so even pursuing, it doesn't have to be crap things that happen to you, like losing a parent, because yes, that's affected me, and that affected me really badly when it happened to me a long time ago. But it's also like things that you think of positive can also affect you. They really, what for me at least, it really sort of made me face some fears that I really didn't kind of wasn't expecting. Had to go, face situations that were very, very difficult. And it could have been so much easier for me to go, oh, sod this. I'm just going to move back to the UK, back to our old house, and just forget I ever even tried. But it was like, no, I've burnt my bridges now. I've just got to keep going. And it was really, really hard. But so, yeah, it's not always the bad life stuff that kind of presents that stuff to you. It's also some of the more positive, like, I don't know, like really stepping outside of your comfort zone kind of really brings out some of that old hidden fear and trauma from behind the crevices, and kind of almost in a way like, do you really, really want this? Like, do you really want this? And it's like, yes, I do. Okay, well, you need to sort this out, because you're not going to, this is the next thing you need to face. And that obviously that's not going to be everybody's experience. Some people can go and pursue their dream lives and it's all plain sailing for them. But for me, it wasn't like that at all. And I've talked about it quite a lot. And yeah, going outside of your comfort zone or pushing yourself is going to start bringing new stuff, because you're literally wandering into new frontiers. You're going into new areas, which are going to bring up fears that weren't there before, because you weren't there before. You weren't, some people say to me, well, how come you keep working on your stuff? Like, this stuff's not working, surely, because you keep having to do it. It's like, well, no, when you clear something and you start doing something new with your life, it brings up new stuff. And actually life just throws more crap your way anyway. When you think about what we've all gone through the last 2 years, that's just been throwing all manner of stuff our way that we've had to deal with. So life is just life, isn't it? And stuff just happens. And I think it's like you say, having tools, the curiosity, and the willingness to kind of go there and go, right, I'm going to sort this out. And that, I think, is what's going to help people get over this stuff and not kind of hide from it, which is why I'm really up for helping people to understand what it takes to, what do they need to do this? And yes, they can do it on their own. We don't always need to have somebody to do it for us, but having somebody to hold our hand definitely helps to kind of G us and cheerlead
I work
us.
a lot with coaches and therapists, and they become coach and therapist because they've had some coach and therapy sessions and they felt good and think, oh yeah, I'd like to help other people. But when they start working, especially if they're working online, realizing they're going to do Zooms and Facebook Lives and post social media things and talk about themselves and promote themselves, like, I can't show off about me. It's like, people are going to think I'm too big for my boots, and all these sayings that they have as children are coming out, and it's working on those. And it's just really about getting curious, because every time we do something, we level up. But doing these podcasts and stuff is a new thing to me, and I've got a podcast coming out tomorrow that has already had 2 million downloads. Wow. They have over 200,000 views every month. Now, if they don't, I asked that before I did the podcast. Now, if that had been 10 years ago and I'd asked that question, well, I probably wouldn't have even done the podcast. I'd have gone, my body would have reacted. I was like, oh, I can't do this podcast. And it's going to be like 2 million people download this, my goodness. But actually, I was like, when it happened, and it's knowing then that you've actually released that trauma. So I was like, oh, I got excited thinking, oh my goodness, that means 2 million people are going to be aware of trauma, the mother wound, and narcissism. So it's going to be, I was excited about it rather than thinking, what are people going to think about me, what I'm saying? It's more the fact of getting my message out there. And it's every time you level up, you discover little things about yourself, and on a positive note as well, because we talked a lot about how it affects you. The positive note, you realize that actually you're growing into this amazing person that you've always been, because you are unburying that amazing diamond of you. Because I can remember when I was 7, looking up at the sky, I wasn't particularly religious, thinking, whoever's listening, I know you've got a purpose for me living this life. Tell me what it is. Because even when I was 7, I knew that I was in that life of being with a narcissistic mother for some reason. And now I've realized it's because I can be the voice for everybody else until they can find their own voice, if they don't feel that they've got one at the moment. Because of me telling my story, it's helping lots of other women come out and say, oh, that was me. But I was told not to say anything about it. Yes, that was me. Like, I run a boot camp every January and September. And on the Sunday, I was doing meet and greet and say, this is the reason I do this boot camp, and this is why I'm an expert at it. And I tell my story, and it kind of pulls a thread where everybody then by the Tuesday night have bonded, because everybody's sharing their story as well, because I set the lead of sharing my story. So they know they're in a safe place to share their story too.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to lead by being open about our own what we're wrestling with. And I think that's really, really, really important. Well, Brooke, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. Is there anything else that you want to say about trauma that we've not touched on that you think is kind of like, hang on a minute, I've really got to say this one thing? Is there anything else you want to share with them?
No, I don't think so. The only thing is just like, at the moment, if you're in trauma and you're surviving and you feel empty and like you're dead inside, but you would actually like to thrive, yes, it's going to get messy, but it's so worth going through that little messy bit to actually start thriving and to feel full inside and to have that confidence to know that no matter what happens throughout the day, that you're going to be okay, because you are good enough, you are worthy, you are important, and you are lovable. You know, it's just the old beliefs and traumas from your childhood often that have stopped you from actually feeling that, because we are born worthy, we are born lovable, we are born, you know, important. Because babies, they will cry when they're hungry, they'll cry when they want to cuddle, they'll cry when they need a nappy change. They don't think, oh, will I upset somebody if I cry? If a toddler wants to have a tantrum or fall asleep in the middle of a supermarket, they just do it, you know. But it's just as we get older, you know, our parents' conditioning, because their parents were conditioning them, that we change how we feel about things and we stop being. And I can remember like my grandson a few weeks back, and it just made me smile, because I think, yes, we definitely broke that cycle of trauma. He came running in the front room with one sock on and a pair of pants. I'm like, that's an interesting outfit, Harry. I said, what? How come you're sporting that today? Just out of curiosity. He went, well, one foot's cold, but the other foot's isn't cold, so I don't need a sock on that foot. So instead of his mum saying, look, either take one sock off or put two socks on because you need to either wear a pair of socks or not, she was quite happy to let him wear just one sock. And he was quite happy, you know, because what's wrong with just wearing one sock if you've got one foot? And to him, that was quite logical. I've only got one cold foot. I don't know why one foot was cold and one foot wasn't, but that's what he said. But he's only 5. So, but yeah, it's realizing that you can be whatever you want to be, just because your parents did it or that your family's already done that way. If it doesn't sit with you and align with you and doesn't feel great with you, you can change it. Really tap into what you want to do and live the life that you really want to do, because it is great on the other side. You've been through it, I've been through it, you know, and we're still here to tell the tale and smiling and happy about it. And I would go through it all again if I knew that this is the result I would get, because it's so much better. And that's why I'm busy talking on podcasts, raising the awareness of it, to help people to go for it and actually get that help that they need.
So if anyone wants to find out more about you, Brooke, where can they track you down online?
I'm hanging out on Facebook mainly, so it's Brooke Bownes 01 on Facebook if you want to send me a friend request, or I've got the Confidence Community, a place where you can be confident to be you, to be seen, to be heard, and to have fun as well. So that's a free Facebook group, and I'm also on Instagram as well as Brooke Bownes. So yeah, feel free to contact me, and my email address is brooke@brookebownes, but I'll send you all the links so you can pop them.
Yeah, you send me all the links, I'll put them in the description. Thank you very much for joining me today, Brooke. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.